Yo, 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 what is going on? We are back with another episode of the Unsilent Church podcast. We got the crew up in the building. James, what up?
What's happening?
V,
How we doing?
you back?
I'm back, man.
How was it?
It was good. It was a good trip. I was, for those who weren't aware, I was in Grenoble, France,
Yeah.
checking out a church there and some of the work they're doing in the community. It was good. It was a short trip, so I'm feeling a little bit.
Yeah.
But I'm here, bro.
Well, listen, man, we got a special guest in the building today. We got our main man, Dawson Allen, in the RCC studios. Dawson, I want to kick it to you, man. Introduce yourself to the people.
Yeah, it's good to be with y'all.
What's up?
So a bit about my story. I came out of non-denominational church world, megachurch world.
Megachurch world.
That's right, megachurch world. It's Calvary Chapel movement, real big
Okay.
churches. I'm sure we got Calvary here in Phoenix too.
Yep.
But came out of that world. I was in Fort Lauderdale at the time. It was the 9th largest church in the country when I was there. So we're talking like Easter Sunday at Dolphin Stadium, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, he's talking mega.
Oh, yeah, that's a different level.
Yeah. So that's the world that
Wow.
I came up in, and I was all in. I loved that space. Felt very deeply formed by it, but then had some worldview shifts, kind of around politics and around race. Really kind of around 2016, seeing how my community kind of responded to the election. Specifically seeing some of the polling data, seeing that like 81% of white evangelicals. I didn't know what that was, evangelical. I didn't know what that word was. Started doing some research. I was like, oh, I think they're talking about me. And then I looked into the data. I was like, oh shoot, that's my church. My church did this. So that kind of catalyzed some worldview shifts, led to some career shifts, that sort of thing. So ended up organizing in the immigrant rights movement. Back in 2018, started studying whiteness and theology, was kind of my academic formation on that front. And yeah, have kind of been in the world of social movements in different ways since then.
Yeah, so that's the main reason why we wanted to bring you in here is that, a lot of your past work and current work is in this idea of movement making. How do you organize people towards social action? Is that sort of a good way of describing movements?
Yeah.
I just love to hear from you in terms of, what makes for a movement, why are movements needed, just a little bit of maybe even the history of movements, and what is it that what are the things that you look for to help organize and do movements?
Can I ask a question before that?
So basically, you're going to bump my question. I just want to make sure I'm hearing that.
Well, my hope is to get a little bit of context before we go to history.
Sure.
You said that you saw polling data, then you had a sort of like academic formation in like whiteness and theology.
Yeah.
And then you went from that to organizing immigrant rights.
Yep.
How do you get from the one to the other?
Yeah. There's kind of a great heartbreak, which is like the in-between, which is that I couldn't find church space that aligned with the values that I wanted to see in the world. So the story was I was on Florida State's campus. And
FSU?
FSU, go Noles. And, it's a big campus. It's really diverse. I'm in a course called Hispanic Literature and American Culture, one of the only white dudes in the course. And this was during the Trump campaign. So I'm sitting there listening to my peers talk about deportation, and I'm like Googling deportation. I'm like, what does that mean? Because Calvary Chapel at the time, you got to remember, this is pre-Trump 1.0, so it's not politicized in the same way that we might think about it now. That feels like a lifetime ago. So we were just kind of like all about Great Commission, like, hey, just like till the whole world hears, no politics, keep politics out of it, was kind of the way that I came up. So I start hearing all these terms from my peers. I'm like, deport? You're talking about you could just get taken? Like, what do you mean? So that kind of shifted my view. It was like listening to my peers that was like, hold on, what's going on here? So I went kind of the academic route because I couldn't find church space that was having the conversations that I wanted to have. Wow. So I turned to the academy to be like, hold on, what's this whole relationship between worldview and then how we show up in the material world? Like, what's the deal there? And then coming out of the academic world, it was like, oh, well, that feels like a little bit stale. I'm not just trying to wear like, like a suit jacket with elbow pads and, like sitting up in the academy, like writing papers that no one's going to read. Like, and that's kind of where I found divinity school. That's where I found the organizing world. So yeah, the kind of failure of the church, or my experience of it, was kind of the leap between, that like polling data and moving on to like academic.
So the people in your class and hearing their experience, you're like, I want to prevent what I hear them going through.
Yeah, I mean, I had felt like, to like really break it down, I felt like I had a call to ministry in 8th grade. Like 8th grade, I was like, I'm supposed to be a pastor, but my whole revelation was like, what if being a pastor was not about bringing more people in, but it was about like tending to the needs of the community, tending to the sort of spiritual life of the community. You got to keep in mind, like, we're talking 9th largest church in the country. That's like a radical shift, to be like, hold on, what if this whole church thing is about something else?
Wow.
So I had felt like a call to service, but then it was the polling data that was like, I don't want to be doing that. Like, I'm not trying to be like a tool of wherever that's going. Like, that's bad news. So then it was kind of turning out and going like, what else is there that I can do? And I didn't understand, like, so I kind of turned to the academy to be like, how do I make sense of this? That's kind of what led me.
So talk a little bit about that. Like, what makes for a movement? What are the things that lead to movement starting, to organizing people for movements? I mean, yeah, I gave my own sort of definition of movement making, but I'd like to hear how you would define a movement.
Yeah.
Just assume that I'm going to assume everyone sort of understands what we mean when we say movement.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many different terms. It's like you can see commercials right now that say like, this is a movement. Like you can catch like a sick Nike commercial that's like, this is a movement, right? Like everything's churches are movements, nonprofits are movements.
Yeah.
Everything's a movement now, right? The kind of tradition that I come from, there's some folks up in Boston, the Ayni Institute, AYNI. It's a Peruvian indigenous word for reciprocity, but they came out of the immigrant rights movement and basically started kind of studying historical movements and then sort of synthesizing, packaging it together, and then training folks. So that's who trained me on sort of movement theory. Social movement ecology is the term that they use. But I think there's kind of like two basic frameworks that when I talk about movement, this is what I'm referring to. One would be social movement ecology. That's 3 primary theories of change that work together towards sort of shared vision. So the first would be personal transformation. How do we sort of cultivate the kind of leaders that we need to have in order to do this work? That would also include like direct services, meeting folks' direct needs, depending on what the movement issue is. The next would be community alternatives. So what's the sort of infrastructure that we're building that's outside of the dominant culture, right? That's sort of like, that's caring for our needs, meeting the community's needs in a sort of collective form, right? And then the third would be changing dominant institutions. And there's kind of sub-strategies within there, right? Now, most people, when we get into the history of it, most people associate changing dominant institutions with sort of what we mean by move. Like we talk about civil rights, we think about John Lewis, right?
Yeah.
But we don't talk about Ella Baker, all the spade work that went into, right? So I think most of us, when we think about social movements, we think about changing dominant institutions, but that's really just one piece of the pie, right? We can analyze what our view of power is. Why do we read history that way? All that sort of stuff. But the basic thing is when you have those 3 theories of change working together with a shared DNA, which is the second framework, that's sort of what creates a movement. So then the DNA, story, strategy, structure, culture. So for movement to sort of be coherent, when you think about the metaphor of DNA, it's like, what makes it identifiably you? Or what makes it sort of coherent, right? How do we tell the story? What are we doing together, right? What are the actual strategies? What are we trying to win? What's the structure? Like, what's the mechanism of how we organize together? And then what's our culture? How do we handle conflict? How do we relate to each other? What's the ways we signify like, oh, he's down, or, that kind of thing. So those 2 frameworks, when I talk about movement, that's what I'm referencing is those 3 theories of change working together with a shared DNA. is kind of what I'm referencing when I say that.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Some of the history of movements. Can you mentioned the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other movement history that some people may not be familiar with?
Yeah. I think the two that are maybe kind of like most prominent example, one, civil rights movement, which is particularly relevant for the American church, right? If you want to start getting into like what's the role of the church, in social change, that kind of thing, that's a good one to unpack. Another one that I think is helpful for folks is Indian independence movement. So think Gandhi, right? When we talk about nonviolent social action, folks often think of Gandhi, this sort of figurehead of nonviolent action in the world. But there was a bunch of different infrastructure strategies that were sort of going into the effort for India to get independence from Britain, right? We could think of the Salt March as like one component of that, but we can also talk about the sort of ashrams that were, sort of equivalent of spiritual communities that were incubating an alternative consciousness, helping meet needs, that sort of thing. And of course, this sort of leadership training that would go into that. So Indian independence movement would be another one. We could look at more recent American history, talk about United Farm Workers movement, right? How are sort of Hispanic communities that were getting exploited in California, how are they organizing to sort of protect their own dignity, workers' rights, that sort of thing. So yeah, there's lots of different ways to go. There's lots of different ways to go.
At what point, when you talked about the three theories that need to work together, like a 3-strand cord, and you have the 4 elements of like DNA, was it story, structure, strategy, and a culture?
Yep.
When those things come together, at what point, and I don't know if this is, I imagine this is in hindsight, but at what point do you go, oh, this is it's almost like a thing you recognize.
Yeah.
Where you go like, oh, this is actually a movement? Are there sort of factors or things you can look at to sort of identify and be like, oh, we are actually in a movement?
Yeah. So the kind of, I think there's a bunch of different ways to answer that. But one of the things that I point to, there's a scholar out of Harvard, her name is Erica Chenoweth, who studies the sort of success of nonviolent movements. Her sort of like theoretical number is that like 3.5% of any given target population is kind of when you reach tipping point. That's when it kind of becomes, there's this sort of collective shift in consciousness that sees like, oh, this is a thing that's happening. So
3.5% of a targeted population.
Let's say like you're trying to build some kind of Christian movement responding to crisis and immigration right now. You would be looking at how many people identify sort of as Christian. What would 3.5% of that be? So that's the target population language, is just like, who are we actually trying to work with? Like what are the communities that we're trying to engage is what we're getting at there. The other thing that I would say is like, there's almost always movement work happening. The question is whether or not it will coalesce in a way that's coherent. So like we can be engaged in the work of movement without feeling like, oh, there is a thriving movement on any particular issue,
So yeah, I mean, that brings up something in terms of what sparks a movement. You said a particular issue sort of spark. What are the things that like tend to generate movement, right? Obviously, I don't think movement is going to spark over. Well, we shouldn't want movement sparking over the fact that, like, I don't know, there's no more tickle me Elmos, right, in the store. We're mad about that, right? That's not a movement.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like the type of movements, the descriptions you described seems to say that the kind of movements we're talking about tend to orient around exploitation of the vulnerable, the poor, that type of thing. Is that sort of what we're really focusing on here?
Yep, totally. And I think this is a helpful way to start to like potentially unpack some of the history here, is like those who exist on the margins or are concerned with the experience of the margins are trying to be in solidarity with those on the margins. We don't have the same tools as those in positions of power, right? As much, if we could all get together right now and write sort of comprehensive immigration reform, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Because we're not sitting in Congress, right? Like the 4 of us here can't pass that legislation. So we got different tools at our disposal. And that's kind of what births movement, is like mass participation. So like, how do we engage the masses and things that are like true to their felt experience of like what are the actual like everyday needs that you feel, that your community feels, and how do we sort of pursue them. So like, yeah, I think oftentimes the experience of exploitation, marginalization, those are things that kind of create like catalytic fodder, I would say, to movement being birthed.
The other thing you mentioned along the way here was that the kind of movement you're talking about it uses nonviolence as a tool, right? So we're not talking necessarily about violent movement making.
Yeah.
Why is nonviolence such an important part of the type of movements you're involved with and talking about here?
Yeah. There's a bunch of different ways to answer this too. I think, I went to Vanderbilt Divinity, which is where Reverend James Lawson went. There's a complicated history there too of the way that Vanderbilt treated Reverend Lawson when he was a student, kind of pushing him out, pushing him out because of his, activism, and then kind of going back and reconciling and trying to make right. But all that to say, Reverend Lawson is someone whose work has been impactful for me. I think one way to say it is that like both the medium and the message matter.
Oh, that's good.
The way that we're engaging ought to be a sort of fractal of where we're trying to go. So that's to say, like, if we're trying to use biblical language, if we're trying to combat the kingdom of Caesar or the kingdom of Trump, then we should be using kingdom of God means to combat that. We shouldn't be, master's tools are that whole situation, right? So we should be using the kind of tools that reflect the kind of world that we want to see in the process. I of course, like to imagine a world where we don't need to be violent to make change. So I know that might be a bold claim in the context of this administration, but yeah, I think that's at least how I come at the nonviolent.
Can I ask a question about? I don't know how much time we have for you to unpack sort of the 4 elements of the DNA. So story, structure, strategy, culture.
Yeah, that's right.
I come heavily out of a creative space. And when you talk about the medium and the message matter, I'm heavy in the message part. Video, creative, storytelling. Like, again, you talk about story and culture. It's almost like those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if can you unpack some of the strategies, and how those play out? And again, I'm asking from a creative, from a creative angle, like how do people, obviously I know in the past people get involved by capturing media and the photography, like in the civil rights movement of the dog, like, towards the young kid. It's like, oh, that was strategic, but they're trying to tell a story. And King is like, if we can get people to see what it's actually like.
Yeah.
One of the critical things you said was mass participation. I think sometimes we forget. Yeah. It's like, no, a movement requires a lot of people, and 3.5% of what, if we take Christians, that's millions and millions of people. Yeah. Not just like a small group. So,
I think it's 7 million. I would have to look at data again, but it's a lot of people. Yeah.
And so I wonder if you could sort of unpack like how you've seen strategy from many angles. Obviously I'm asking from a creative angle, but how you've seen strategy in particular sort of like play out and help sort of fuel movement so that you can see some change happen without violence.
Yeah. One thing there, I'm stoked on the creative perspective. I think that's something, I think the role of faith and creativity are 2 of the more underplayed elements in our sort of current landscape. It would be my personal conviction. So I think the role of art and creatives is absolutely critical. And I think it moves to a couple different aspects of that framework. Is creative imagery is both imagery and narrative is like part of that story. The reason we start with story is because it's the most fundamental way that humans connect with each other. Like, I think one of the mistakes that particularly sort of liberal or progressive causes make is this assumption of like people operate like they're a brain on a stick. It's like, oh, if we just give them the right data, then they'll do the right thing. But how many times have y'all shared information about a particular cause, issue, whatever, and then people look at you dead behind the eyes? It's like, because that's not how we change. That's not actually how the brain works, right? Story, on the other hand, like we tell stories all the time. You asked me who I was, I told a story, right? It's like this is how we connect to each other. So I think the creative element of that, of like, how do we locate ourselves? How do we put ourselves in context? What does that sort of look like? So the creativity can play an aspect in that. I think another way to keep going at it from the sort of creative angle would be to say that like the creativity also sort of helps spark a vision of what's possible. This is why we see so much good sci-fi, because we're trying to imagine something that doesn't exist, right? It's not super, like, this is Jesus going to like kingdom of God. It's like, hey, it's kind of like, you've heard it said, it's kind of like this, but I say to you, it's a little bit different. There's something else happening here. Like that's an imaginative process, you know? I'm getting sidetracked on the creative piece, but I think those sort of elements, there's whole debates on the sort of like movement theory and like organizing side of like what's really good structure. Part of it they talk about for structure is like that it's decentralized, right? So that it's not predicated on Dawson needing to be in the room, right? We're trying to create structures that can absorb all kinds of folks who want to engage. That would be part of the structure piece. The strategy would be like, hey, what's the actual target? Like, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to get voting rights? Are we trying to get safe and fair elections? Are we just naming things that might feel relevant? And, you know, are we trying to protect our immigrant neighbors? Like, what are we actually aiming at? And then how do we get there? Who do we think we can get to, you know, stand up in Congress and say, yes, I'm in favor of this?
Yeah, so I think this is very helpful, because my question was going to be sort of what are the nuts and bolts of movement making, because I think that then guides you towards, you know, where it's effective or maybe where it's not effective. That it's interesting. We start with, here's a problem, here's an issue, we got to mobilize and organize people, but it seems like movements at their best lead to a concrete result, and there actually has to be maybe law change, et cetera. That sometimes movements can be almost like they start with an idea. I mean, honestly, I think like Black Lives Movement, here's this concept, but then it can devolve into like more of a vibe, right?
Yeah.
Where it's sort of like, we want this, but there's nothing actually concrete sort of aimed for or done.
Yeah.
And then it can begin to disintegrate in
That's
different
right.
ways. And is that sort of, I wonder if like, as the different elements you mentioned, the degree in which those elements aren't strong and defined, is that sort of what helps a movement be effective versus not effective?
Can I go to the gospel for example?
Oh, you want to go Jesus on us?
Okay,
All right, I guess
So-
we'll allow it.
Yeah, we'll allow it. Okay. So here's one way to think about it: is the Jesus movement is dealing with three distinct forces of co-optation, right? These are things that can allow the movement to sort of have its teeth taken out, right, or kind of get absorbed back into empire.
Like wokeness.
Yeah, and the wokeness is an interesting example, but I won't get sidetracked here. So, one of the ways that it can get absorbed is by the sort of dominant institution making a concession, right? So you might think of if we're trying to stick with the Jesus example here, you can think about the Roman Empire sort of making concessions to say like, hey, Christianity's cool. Actually, we're good with that. Y'all keep doing your thing. That you know, to sort of say like to hem you in and be like, yeah, you're good. You can keep engaging with that. That's one way that sort of movement infrastructure can get absorbed. And of course, the Roman Empire eventually does historically do this, right? Says, hey, wait a second, this whole resistance thing, that's actually us. We're the resistance. It's like, hold on, y'all. What's the switch up that's going on here, right? So that's one of the sort of forces that's at play here. Another thing that can lead a movement to sort of be absorbed is this sort of infighting around who's in and who's out. This is all throughout the epistles, right? It's like who counts, who doesn't, who's doing it the right way. It's all the epistles is basically like a bunch of conflicts from the movement. There's all these decentralized community structures, right? Like across the Roman Empire that are sort of engaged in an alternative way of being in the world together that reflects the kingdom of God here on earth. And then there's conflicts about like, can we do it this way? Can we include this person? How do we do meal together? Like, so that's another way that movement can sort of fall apart, is if we get either too loose about what we're actually for, or if we get too tight, too constricted about who's in, who's out, right? This is actually kind of a dynamic on the wokeness piece. The sort of like failures of progressive, particularly white progressive culture, is when folks show up to movement, we often do like a purity check. It's kind of like a new fundamentalism. It's like, and I'm not saying I'm against any of these things in particular, but I am against using them as sort of like gatekeeping for who can participate in building a more loving world. That's silly to me.
Yeah.
So kind of going like, wait a second, are you, locating yourself in the right way? Are you
right
doing
terms.
the right terminology, the right language? Not that stuff doesn't matter, but it shouldn't be a prerequisite to kind of joining in, building a more loving world. So that's another dynamic here. Then the last one would be like this sort of economic absorption, right? Like we can have this sort of temptation. Movements can have the temptation. This is kind of where they become a vibe when it can get commercialized, right?
Yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah. So like I'm a big sports fan. We've seen NBA and NFL they tend to be pretty late to the game, in terms of how they respond to like social movements.
When they do, they got the merch.
Yeah, they got the merch though. Someone's got, you got to have the sick, and all of a sudden, like, I love Cap. I'm a huge Cap fan, but all of a sudden it's all about like buying the right Colin Kaepernick jersey. And it's like that's not what Cap was taking a knee for, right? So that's one of the ways that like market or sort of commercialization. So all those different temptations are kind of things that can kind of absorb movement or lead them to fall apart.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned too the idea of the in your story, the failure of the church, and how you went from church space to the academy, to basically find essentially kind of like a safe space to be able to talk about these things, learn about these things, and act on these things. In terms of the failure of the church in that regard, I'm sure along the way in community organizing, you've come across a lot of different people, some that wasn't even Christian. They're not even Christian. And so the question is, from your perspective, what are the failures of the church, and what can the church do to be able to have spaces for people like yourself and others to find a safe place so they can be able to learn, but also be able to act in a more just way?
Yeah. I should clarify too, like my context, it was also particularly the white church and the white megachurch in particular.
And in your case, it seemed like it was a white mega church.
Yeah. Capital M, mega. Yeah.
Ultra church.
Yeah, ultra
mega
you
church.
You doing
Dolphin Stadium.
Easter services and I'm a Miami Dolphins fan, by the way.
I didn't know that, bro.
I'm a Miami Dolphins fan.
I'm so sorry.
Let's not get distracted.
Me too. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Let's not get sidetracked. We don't want to talk about other people's teams on here.
Let's not.
Yeah. There's probably only one of us who's more miserable than a Dolphins fan. He might be sitting across from me, but
I think Dawson's been great having you here. I think that concludes.
Okay, I'm back. I'm locked in. So what I experienced was when I started asking questions about the church's public witness, I was shut down. There was no space for conversation. Ironically, it was my mom who was deeply embedded in the church who essentially said, and she was like one of a handful of voices that were sort of like a loving presence to me in this time of like questioning. One of them was a coach. Another was my mom, but mom basically said like, hey, I see the questions that you're asking. You're going further than I've gone. I don't understand, but I want you to know it's blessed. Like I love you. I trust
Shout out
where
the
you're
moms.
going.
Shout out the moms.
Yeah. There's a particular role there because it was like the institutional church was failing, but my mom knew how to show up and be loving. And
Even though she didn't understand it all.
Yeah, she didn't understand, and she even said, I don't get it, but I know it's good. Like you're blessed on the path that you're walking on. So I think if the church could have held more of that,
Yeah.
or even just the space to be in dialogue, like, because I was, let's think 2016, I was 19 or 20 maybe.
Common age.
And I'm like asking these questions. I'm like, hold on, 81%? Like I was genuinely confused. It's like you're talking about the vast majority of people who look like me, who grew up in the same church context as me, voted for Donald Trump. How does that make sense? I literally do not understand. Can y'all help me explain? Like, and there wasn't space for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think having the space for it, one, blessing the kind of struggle would be another piece of it too. And then I think more tactically kind of getting to the movement is like having conversations like this, like Unsilent Church, or like the way that Roosevelt's trying to show up in the community. Like, I think if I would have found a Roosevelt at 19 or 20, I would have just plugged right in. I would have just been like, oh, I'm done with the megachurch thing, but here's this other way of being in community that integrates both, the concerns of sort of like spirituality, the inner life, and also justice work. Like, so I think having more churches that are willing to be in those conversations is like a huge asset. And I think it's like, if I can throw a little bit of loving shade here, it's like kind of like this whole like deconstruction phase that we saw. I feel like it was bigger, maybe like 2015-ish. Everyone I knew was deconstructing. I use that language too. So that's why I say like loving shade. I use the language too, but I think some of what we did was we saw something that was wrong about our communities. So we took community all together and threw it out and just gave up on community as a whole and acted like we were better for having given up on community, when really we just got absorbed into the dominant culture. So it was like, really then it just meant we were like good American capitalists unconsciously. That's really what it meant to throw out community, because we had no alternative value system. But then we felt superior, and listen, I repent for this. I did the same. I did this. I left the church and then was like, stupid being in church. All these people doing dumb, blah, blah, blah. I felt superior, right? Yeah. So I think that's part of the failure of both like the church and then those of us who have kind of wrestled with being in and out of church. We find one thing that's wrong with it, and then we kind of throw out the whole community thing, and we don't know how to be in conflict together.
You talked before about being absorbed into the empire, and this administration has gotten very good, at creating media and narrative and co-opting Christian language to tell their story, right? And to shape to sort of shape the understanding of what's happening in a way that tries to have the Bible endorse him, right? And I wonder, when you think about what's happening now, what is faith supposed to do when it comes to movement making? And when you think about your experience, and then you going to the academy and that being a very formative experience, when you think back, and John asked a similar question, but just to think, what's supposed to be the role of faith when it comes to movement making?
The first thing I would say in response to that is the bad news about movement technology is that it's sort of agnostic. Good guys can use it, bad guys can use it. And if you look at the sort of minority of sort of like the alternative right, the Christian right, these clowns are organized. Like we're talking about 1971, little bit of history. Powell memo sort of lays out like a play of like, this is what the culture were. If you want to talk about like the origins of Charlie Kirk, it's prototyped in 1971 in the Powell memo. And so we're talking about from 71 to present, they've been on a long range plan.
50 years.
And they've created alternative institutions like the ones that I came from. Calvary was a pipeline to Liberty University, to the Jerry Falwell, that kind of, it was a pipeline. I mean, it was easy, bro. Like I'm telling you, I could have rode that wave because it's so coherent in terms of the movement ecology. it's tight.
Yeah. Provides community, meaning, structure.
That's right. All of it. So I would say one, that's the bad news about movement technology is people on both sides can use it, right? Or you can use it in any direction is maybe a better way to say it. The role of faith, it's funny, I was reading a little bit of King getting prepared for this conversation. And, there's like the classic quote that I'm not going to have it verbatim, but it's essentially to say like, we're not supposed to, the church, those of us who claim a faith identity, are not supposed to be sort of like agents of the state. We're supposed to be its moral conscience. Later, one of the things that King talked about, and I wrote this one down, it was August 31st, 1967, National Conference on New Politics. King talks about his big three evils. He talks about racism, talks about militarism, and materialism. Now, if you remember those three temptations that I named that were sort of present in the Jesus movement, you can kind of map them onto there. There's the in-out thing, which is the racism, who's in, who's out. There's the militarism, which is kind of like the show of force or the absorption, right?
Yeah, use of power.
Yeah, and then there's the materialism or the consumerism, So I think the role of the church is like to provide an alternative consciousness. Like it should be incubating the kind of consciousness leaders that, birth a king, or like I love Howard Thurman was a big part of like my return to faith after I kind of left the church, right? Then I had a professor at grad school who put me on to Howard Thurman, and it was like, I didn't know this existed. Like, I didn't know there was good stuff like this.
Jesus and the Disinherited?
Dude, lit me up. I was like, oh, snap. I had no idea there's a whole history here. There's people who have been chipping away at the same stuff. I had no idea.
Yeah.
But I think that's sort of the role of faith. That's what it ought to be, is sort of to be a consciousness, to be a moral guide.
Yeah.
And then not to rely on the sort of mechanisms of government to like meet all of our needs. Like, I know this is crazy, but like, what if we had everything we needed to take care of each other and we didn't need this sort of militaristic power to like, let's just imagine, let's play with that for a little bit, like, I think that is part of what the church could offer, what faith communities could
It's
offer.
such a different conversation than all the conversations present around AI and the sort of like age of abundance and all of the things that AI is going to provide in regards to intelligence, consciousness, just the language that you're using in regards to like what faith communities can be and what they can provide is it's literally, a zag to the zig of all the conversation around AI. If you pay even a little bit of attention, it's like, AI is going to like quintuple. I mean, it's going to like explode provision and abundance and, income. And there's just going to be so much. AI is going to do so much for us, and this is saying, no, actually, it hasn't changed. We are still, and again, you're feeling this in the sense that people are getting a little bit fatigued with AI when it's like, people still want to connect with people. And to just play with what you just said is like, what if we had everything that we need to take care of each other? And it's just such a contrary way of looking at the world, considering the conversation around AI right now.
I'm going to go back to something you said, sort of this idea of, and I think that faith at its best creates community that actually draws people together. And even in that space, there might be conflict and tension, but faith in God, faith in Christ, the gospel should be big enough, strong enough for that, and can actually move us forward in a way that doesn't mean we also necessarily vote the same way.
That's
but
right.
we should act in some very concrete ways. Because I think what I'm hearing you say is, I think I want to say this, that the kind of movement we're talking about that addresses the issues today, it doesn't require like relitigating everything, right? Or even like you almost described, if I understood you right, that you wanted just a context where you should understand why some people voted for Trump, right? Or didn't, or whatever that might be. But then call us to something greater and better. That often what happens is like, okay, we're looking for a certain shibboleths, some sort of like pre-markers of like, are you aligned in all these different ways?
Yeah.
You're actually talking about I think maybe I'm describing what movement could look like today. A movement that actually does draw people together who might lean Republican or Democrat, but can all sort of say we're all citizens of the kingdom of God. We hold faith together, and we have to work that out all the time. But our faith should make us, at the very least, say we act for the sake of the vulnerable.
Yeah.
We act for the sake of the marginalized.
Yes.
Is that sort of what you're describing there?
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. I think like one of the things that I would say is to kind of like pull from a little bit of Cornell West on like race matters. Talk about like sometimes even our framing around liberalism and conservatism is actually part of the construct that prohibits us from being in a more meaningful conversation. So sometimes this sort of like engaging with like the sort of like political purity. It's like the shibboleth looking for the like, oh, are you? It's like, I don't know. I just find that uninteresting. One, it's like, stop. We've done this rinse and repeat so many times. Like, I think it's a mistake to start at the engagement of ideas. To start with, hey, what do you think about fill in the blank? What do you think about solidarity? I don't want to start there. I was on a call with an organizer in Chicago. I mean, they've been getting blitzed by Trump administration for 4 months now, with all the ICE presence. And she said, solidarity has a name, and like named 2 community members that she was going to, see later that day of like, hey, this is, and I think to start there, that like community helps us start there. Like start with the actual relationships, organize around those things. Like what are the needs in the actual community, and what like that will lead us to right belief instead of starting out front with this sort of like belief policing or purity checkpoints. Like let's start with like, yo, how do we love fill in the blank person who has this experience as an immigrant, as a person of color.
That's great.
And let's start there.
Yeah. So, I mean, even just really name it. I mean, I think, so even here locally, we may start with like, what do you think about immigration and how did you vote related to that? As opposed to like, hey, look at the Garcia family here. Look at the Perez family here. Hey, we've known them for 10, 20 years.
Right. That's good.
Guess how they're feeling right now. Did you know that some of them are undocumented? Wait, what do you mean like the people who I've been buying groceries from they're undocumented? What do you think should happen to them? Do you think they should be treated this way?
That's good.
That becomes a way different way of engagement. Most people, I think, the vast majority of people, however they voted, would say, well, I know them, I relate to them, I want them to be treated with grace, with care, et cetera. And that then begins to help us better address the bigger question as opposed to starting from the sort of theoretical issue.
That's really good.
Yeah.
Really good.
And I think there's like long philosophical traditions that have been split on this. Like, do we start with kind of the world in front of us and extrapolate from there? Or do we start with the, this abstract and then, that defines our sort of world? But like my experience when I started organizing was I was doing a method called deep canvassing. And it was about finding people who, based on their voting data, we knew they believed differently than us on any particular topic. So actually my first campaign in the immigrant rights space was trying to get the state legislature to prevent workplace raids in East Tennessee. And so what we did was looked at voting data, it's public record, and we saw, did people support Trump or not? Who had they voted for? And then we would create a script or like a conversation, like kind of like guide point for how do we go find these doors, knock on the actual doors, not keyboard warrior, not like I'm talking about showing up at someone's actual porch, standing under the Christian flag and the American flag in Smyrna, Tennessee, knocking doors going like, hey, like I'm in your neighborhood. I want to talk about the American way of life and immigration. Can I ask you what you think about da-da-da? And then we would go from who do you know? What do you think? Locate yourself. Are you support or against this? And then we take it, put that on the side, and then it's all about like, who's your neighbor? Do you know anyone who's immigrated? What's their story? Have you connected with them? Have you talked to them? Blah, blah, blah. And what we found in that methodology is that people, it was actually 3-fold more effective than any other persuasive intervention of its kind. Because it wasn't just an ad on TV or a pamphlet or that sort of thing. It was grounding in door-to-door, face-to-face contact. I can't just dismiss somebody who believes differently than me. I got to reckon with like this person standing in front of me saying things that I feel are abhorrent, hold my position and still be loving and relate to them. And I think community offers like that magnified. It's like, cause that's just door to door. We would have a team of 20 organizers on a particular campaign, but it's like when you have community, that's a whole different thing to get into.
A lot of the strategy reminds me of the way companies do sales and marketing. I work in marketing, so that when I hear all this and movement making, I'm just storytelling and strategy. I'm just like, this is a lot of the way we think. Community building, all of that. And so when you talk about the market and what they've done in regards to like absorbing these kinds of like, just absorbing the entire thing, like absorbing movement, language, and strategy and all that kind of stuff. I go, it rings very true. One question is, how many times do people close the door in your face? Just in that process, because that's a thing that happens in door-to-door sales. I imagine you're knocking on doors and you say something sort of that's antagonist to their belief, and I just wonder, I'm not interested in close the door. But then two, how do you prepare people for something like that? Like, what should they be reading? What should they be watching? Who should they meet? You talk about community being a magnifier of that. Who should they be connecting to if they feel like they're in a space that isn't quite like as open to it, right? Sometimes it's not like I can just go, across the aisle in my church and find somebody who does these things. It's just like they might watch this and go, I don't have anybody like him or them or in my immediate space. Like, what should they be reading? What should they be watching? What can they be connecting themselves to at least start to prime their thinking and start creating shelf space in their own mind to start the journey. Consuming to help them move in that direction.
Bro, I had that door slammed on me so many dang times. But what I'll say is like, that's to bring it back to movement language, this would be one of the limitations of that deep canvassing technology is it took a lot of doors to get somebody to stay out in a conversation. I would say more often was like no answer, the kind of like peek through the blinds and then like, wave off, that sort of thing. But what was shocking to me was people really want to talk. People are lonely. People are scared. The institutions that have like typically given us the space to process these kind of things are eroding, right? Like y'all exist in church. I don't need to tell you all the data about how the church landscape has shifted, right? But it's shifted. People are lonely. They want connection. So if you can provide a sort of like warm, non-judgmental presence, people want to connect. I think that's one of the things that was like shocking for me was then going like, hold on, where did I get this messaging that people don't want to connect? And now of course there's bad conversations. I'm not trying to act like it's all cute out there. Like I have bad conversations all the time, but for the most part, I say the majority of people that you actually get out the door, they want to connect and they want to share what they think and they want to be mirrored and, have people engage with them. So I think that's surprising to me. And I'm still trying to unlearn that, right? Like, why do I have these sort of like beliefs that shut down conversation before I'm even in it? Where do those come from? Where does that messaging come from? So I think that's something I'm always trying to unpack. And then I think as far as like where to start, there's this author that I really like on Substack. His name's Garrett Bucks. He's a white dude in the Midwest that talks a lot about like helping white allies kind of like join causes. How do we organize? How do we, that sort of thing. And he had this beautiful reflection recently that was basically like something to the effect of like, you should host a potluck this week because it might be the only thing that can save us from fascism. Wow. And it was like a bold claim, but then he actually kind of like made the case of like, hey, I understand that because of the way that our world is organized socially, you might not have an organizer at your church. You might not have someone who has this strategy, that sort of thing. But you definitely have 2 to 3 people who are going to eat dinner sometime this week in your life. And it's like, even if you can just engage in the social muscle, it's like, if you're asking that question, one, welcome. Like, I'm stoked you're here. You're good right where you are, and I'm thrilled about that. And then 2, just like start where you're at. Do you have 2 to 3 friends that you can get together with? It doesn't have to be the most diverse dinner you've ever had in your entire, but it's like you're building the muscle.
That's good.
It's not to say don't be conscious of those things or that sort, but just it's like start where you're at. Start having those conversations. Start going like, hey, let's get a group together. Let's identify something that we care about. Like what's the need here? It could be school board stuff for people who are parents. It could be, if you got immigrant, neighbors in your community, it's like, hey, what do they need right now? Do they need meal train? Do they need drive to the doctor appointment? Do they need, ice watch in the neighborhood? Like we all are experiencing the impacts of the kingdom of Trump in some way or another. Can we get together and talk about how do we build kingdom of God alternatives to kingdom of Trump stuff? So it's like, just start where you're at. It would be my kind of, my response to that.
Yeah. Last question. I know we're going to be wrapping up soon, but I know that you've obviously traveled. You've done a lot of community organizing, all the stuff that you're talking about. And in spaces, you have people that are Christian, but also you have people that are non-Christian, people that don't, have, and then even in Christendom, there's different traditions within that. And so I guess as a question, it's just like, in these spaces, where are all the Christians actually at when it comes to these types of meetings, conversations, trainings?
Yeah.
From your perspective, like where are the Christians at?
Yeah.
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 This is a big last question.
Yeah, it is it's a big one. I think the Christian church in America, starting really in like the early 70s, has kind of forfeited its public witness, is my like sort of blunt assessment.
How so?
Like I'm trying to remember the King quote. I think it's Letters from a Birmingham Jail, where he talks about the risk of the church losing its sort of moral relevance. And I think he meant it as a warning, and unfortunately we can look back on it. It feels more predictive because the church hasn't showed up in these ways. So just like candidly, like I don't meet a lot of, like I meet Christians who like to talk about ideas and like to talk about, like how to get people in their church. But then it's largely folks who wouldn't identify as Christian, but who really kind of like are interested and curious about what I think. Like once we've actually like rubbed shoulders, worked together, that kind of thing, they're like, hold on. So what's the whole faith thing for you? Like, what does that look like? So the sort of like blunt answer is like, I wish there was more. I don't see a lot of it is kind of the unfortunate reality of, at least that I've experienced. Yeah. And then I would say there's like lots of reasons for that. Like, there is this sort of like common dynamic where, there are, demographically speaking, white, wealthy, mainline churches that sort of have folks who are mostly retired, who have like the freedom and spaciousness to show up and be on these calls and be at this sort of thing, which is great. I'm so glad they're there. Like I'm not one to turn away, somebody who's down to like do kingdom work, right? So that's not what this is about. But I think we do have to start asking some critical questions. We got to start understanding our history to go like, hey, where are the Christians at? What are the kind of like church interventions that need to happen to start getting people to show up in that way? And I don't say we've lost public witness as a sort of like condemnation or like damning. It's like, hey, like I'm still here fighting for it. If I didn't care about it, I would have said no to this podcast, right? Like I care about the way that Christians show up in the world. So I'm saying it's worth fighting for, but I haven't met like big pockets. You find little pockets. You find a Roosevelt, in a couple different cities. You find people who are wrestling in their own way, but it's not widely accessible.
I saw a quote where someone said that the church's historical acceptance of colonization formed it to resist justice. And I was like, ooh, when you think about like formative past and like what has happened, and you when you're talking about like empire versus kingdom, what happens there. But I wonder if almost in the same way like culture forms you and forms your thinking, you know, are there things, especially when you talk about learning history, and that's where I sort of ask about what people can read or any resources, and maybe my question is like, how can people stay connected to you? How do they learn more about you so that they can start to maybe deconstruct some of these patterns of the past? And you're talking about messaging and where do certain thoughts come from? You don't realize like there's such a long history, you know, that has been taught in a certain way. You know, take Puritans and people who own slaves, and you're like, well, how do you own slaves but then like write prayers like this? Like, I don't understand, you know. But then you get to today, it's like, okay, well, if that's the past that has formed me, it doesn't have to inform my future. It doesn't have to be the thing that shapes my future. How then do I take a new path? Right? How do I stay connected? How do I reground myself, reframe my story to understand like, oh, I'm a different person. I'm not merely human. I'm a citizen of a different kingdom. Yeah. And like, how does somebody take that step in that direction? And again, like some of the work that you're doing, how do people stay connected with you?
Yeah. I'll do a couple things. I'll be brief though. Well, so on the thought of like, does culture shape thought? There's this great kind of anecdote that it's like one fish swims by the other and goes, "How's the water?" And the younger fish goes, "Well, what the heck is water?" And it's like the culture is the water. Yeah, we're just swimming in it. We're often unconscious of it. So it's like the task is, how do we become visible? How do we see the cultures that we're swimming in? How do we trace where those messages come from? That sort of thing. Practical things, I would say like Einie has YouTube videos that give a much better, I mean, these folks are folks who have been chipping away at it for 20 plus years, got a bunch of different organizers who have been at this work for a long time. So they're like...
AYNI.
That's right, yep. And they've got a YouTube page. There's like a 15-minute introduction to movement ecology video. They got a bunch of other of their sort of like frameworks on there as like intro videos. So that's like a great, if you just want to kind of start to understand some of the frameworks that I'm operating out of.
Right.
Another thing that I would say might be helpful is like for those interested in church life, there's a great book by Greg Leffel called Faith Seeking Action. I think it was actually his PhD that got turned into a book. It's all about like the mission of the church and how to integrate with social movement, how to learn from social movement. It's heady, but it's really good. And there's good history of movements in there. There's good kind of like church strategy stuff.
We could put all those links like in show notes and link the YouTube channel too. So that's great.
I would say those two are good places to start for those interested in the faith stuff, and then those interested in the framework.
Perfect.
Good, man. Good. Dawson, man, it's been good having you here.
Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you for blessing us with your wisdom. You said a lot of good things, but one of the things that I'm very proud about of you is being a Miami Dolphins.
Oh my gosh.
And so I just want to say thank you. We're in a struggle together, brother.
It's a testament to human
in more
will.
than one way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you're going to conclude us here, John?
Yeah, we're going to conclude. Yeah, we're going to conclude. We won't talk about other teams here except for the Miami Dolphins.
See.
Listen, as we always say, before we always say what we say, when we say it, like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. Like we always say, of God, of people, we are out. Peace.